Hey church, we're so glad that you tuned in for another weekly devotion. Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at 2 Corinthians 4 verses 16 through 18 and really ask the question of how do we experience renewal as Christians? Is it incredibly obvious? Is the path toward Jesus just a constant growth of linear holiness? Or is it something else? So let's look at that passage together. This is what Paul writes. He says, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outward self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." Now, I'm not sure if you've ever seen a movie where you're pretty positive that there is no way that the movie could end on a happy ending. One of the movies that comes to mind here is Interstellar. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, but I remember being in the movie theater and thinking, how in the world is this movie going to end on a positive note? Because if you've seen the movie, Matthew McConaughey's character goes to space to help save the world for his children. And pretty soon into their mission, their interstellar mission, things go bad, right? They end up getting sucked into a planet that has time that 7 years for every hour or something like that. 23 years go by. He ends up seeing his kids grow old. It's crazy. More and more things happen. People die. There's crashes. And then you kind of get to this point where you're like, there's no possible way this could end on a good note, right? There's no possible way that all of these wrongs can be undone. I think that's how a lot of us feel today. At least that's how I feel. We look around. We see political chaos. We see emotional health at an all-time low with depression and anxiety. We see all these things happening. We see all these reports about how things are going to get worse before they get better. And quite honestly, our culture, our secular culture, out of all the cultures in history, is one of the least equipped cultures to dealing with pain and suffering. Because according to our culture, we need to express ourselves and we need to experience pleasure, right? And neither of those things are happening because the pleasure meter, if you will, is not very high. We're all kind of miserable in some way, shape, or form. We can't buy all the material goods, which according to our culture, are going to make us happy. And many of us feel like torn between ourselves. We can't pursue the authentic self because, as Augustine said, we feel like a stranger to ourselves. We don't really know who we are. The things that used to give us identity aren't anymore. And we as Christians can begin to wonder, what does it look like to live in this time? Is there any hope? How could we have a good ending to this story when everything around us seems so dark? And Paul says, you don't need to look around at what is seen. Because if you only look around at what is seen, if the only measure of your happiness, of your discipleship, of the way things are going, is by what you see, you're inevitably going to walk away disappointed and discouraged, particularly in the middle of a pandemic, right? What you have to do is look to the things he says that are unseen. The things, the suffering that is being caused to us, he says, is doing something in us that's unseen. It's renewal. You see, because grace does not look like the cultural definition of lack of suffering and comfort and material pleasure and all this other stuff that culture tries to push on us. Grace and the renewal that grace brings often is painful. And often it's not just painful, but it's gradual and it's unseen. It goes without being noticed. But Paul says you need to look to the things that are unseen. So I don't know where you are, church. Maybe you're super discouraged because you don't see or feel Jesus. You're like, how could Jesus, not even just in your own life, but how could Jesus be here in my life? But also, Lord, how could you be at work in the world? I don't see you anywhere. But Paul knows this. He says, look, it's happening beneath the surface. The anchor that holds your soul, you don't see an anchor in the middle of a storm, but you feel it's there. You know it's there. It's unseen, but it's active. And in a way, spiritual renewal, the grace that brings spiritual renewal, that's gradual, that's sometimes painful, it's kind of like working out, especially if you're working out for the first time, because it's painful. You often don't see any growth, and you want to quit because you're like, I've been doing this for a month and all I feel is pain and I don't see any results and I just feel miserable and all I want to do is eat ice cream. At least that's how I feel. I don't know about you guys when you first work out. But Paul encourages us when he says that look to the things that are unseen. And you need to constantly do that in prayer, in Sabbath, in solitude. We also need to do that in community. Because sometimes you need someone else to look at you and say, look, I see growth in you. I see God's grace in your life, because you often can't see it yourself. Or you need someone to look at you and say, look, I don't see the most healthy habit here. Or you're kind of being a jerk. You're kind of not living in step with the gospel. And obviously that has to be done with grace and all that jazz. But sometimes we need other people to point that out. In fact, I think we always need other people to point those things out with us. But just to encourage you, church, that spiritual renewal is often unseen. By us, that is. It goes on beneath the surface, and we need others to point that out. But we just need to be encouraged that God is still at work, even if we don't see it. Even if sometimes we don't feel it. You are being made more into the image of God the more you abide in His grace. So I would encourage you to do that practically in prayer, in scripture reading, in Sabbath, in solitude, in spending time in community. And know that these things are doing something to you, even if you can't see them. But these things that are being done to you are eternal. Find encouragement in that. Love you guys.